Can I call you a veteran? Is that all right?
Sure. A veteran of something.
I'm trying to set you up, to be sort of experienced and wise, because my starting question to you is, you and I have been around quite a long time. We've seen insurers invest, billions in data strategies. Where have they got to after spending all that money? What's the current state of play?
Well, I think as you've heard some of the themes already today, AI runs on the data it's provided, right? And decisions are driven by the data you have access to. So I think that no one needs to be convinced they need a data strategy at this point, especially in insurance. I think we're moving towards now what we describe as the decision era, right? So how to go from this multi-billion-dollar investment in data so that you have a scalable decision strategy in the company.
Well, Indico, Andy gave you such a gift of to go sort your data out.
I caught that one too.
Yeah, beautiful. So where does Indico data then fit within an insurance? But presumably they've got a decent strategy going. In this day and age, where do you seek to fit yourself within that strategy?
Yeah, I think that insurance companies, like many industries, struggle between what they have to deal with right now and where they want to go. If you think about insurance, there are many insurance companies that are still running on mainframes that haven't been rebooted in 20 years, right? So in certain markets like Japan, that's basically the entire market. They're still running on mainframes. So there is a legacy technology that they have to think about. And there's some other things. I think, I can't remember if it was Andy or Gary mentioned fax, right? Just get us off of faxes. I don't think we're there anymore. I think faxes have kind of drifted away. But the number one, I like to kind of joke, the number one API in insurance is email, right? Most of these transactions start with somebody sending an email. An underwriting submission generally starts with an email and a bunch of attachments. And Andy mentioned the sort of dreaded PDF. And PDFs, in commercial lines especially, this is sort of a Tower of Babel problem. You're going to get N number of variations of submissions that have to be translated into some kind of schematic data that a downstream system understands.
So, insurers are in a bit of bother if they haven't invested in the technologies that enables them to input emails and to extract data from PDFs. That will be part of everybody's strategy. Going forward, where do you see the real sort of competitive? What are you data companies, and there's several of it. What are you going to fight over? Where's the big next opportunity for you and people like you?
Yeah, I think the next opportunity is understanding that, especially with Gen AI and things like RAG, the ability to have the right sort of pools of context at your fingertips at any given moment is going to be really critical, because unlocking the capabilities here means, and you've heard some of these examples already in the conversation so far, and I heard this from several customers even this week I was visiting. Well, we really want to know that this submission, how should we compare that to all of the submissions we've auto-declined or that we approved? It's a great idea, but it means that you have at the ready the context of those past submissions that you auto-declined. And they have to be in a form that Gen AI could query and understand and combine with these other pools of context given the question at hand. So I think that unlocks the door to agents, right? The sort of agent-based technology. But first you have to think about, what are the pools of context, and are they in a state where I can access them so I can use them to make decisions?
You talk about decisions a lot, and I think your statement on your website is from data to decision. I like this expression, decisioning. What do you mean by decisioning? And then we'll come on then to talk about sort of decisioning and decisioning supply chains.
Yeah, I think your decisioning strategy is, as a company, how have we thought about going from the plumbing we needed for data, right? Data lakes, data warehouses, et cetera, and applying that same kind of mentality to, as an organization, how do we think about decisioning? How do we make it traceable? I think, Gary talked about that a lot. And the regulators are going to require this, right? You're going to have to explain every decision you make. And I think when we built Indico, one of the first things we did was build explainability into it and got sort of a Gartner Cool Vendor recognition right out of the gate back in 2018, because we looked at this and said, look, the hard part is not building a model that can do extraction. The hard part is doing it in a way that is also completely explainable and transparent. And that's even more true today with Gen AI, which is more complex to make traceable, auditable, explainable.
data lineage, it's called. I thought that was a nice expression. You also use the expression decisioning supply chain. I mean, they're very closely linked to the whole issue of lineage. But the supply chain is basically the same thing in the context of how many different people have handled the data. Go to talk to me about.
That's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I heard you use the expression decisioning economy at some point. Are that the same sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that more often than not, when we engage with a carrier, there's a desire to sort of talk about the approach and the method that we're going to use to solve the problem. And oftentimes they bring that to us. Here's how we want you to solve it. And the key is to say, hang on, let's talk about outcomes first. It seems kind of obvious, but it's easy to overlook. People get excited about the technology and how we're going to apply it, et cetera. But we always say, hang on, let's talk outcomes. Then let's work backwards. And let's make sure that these technology pieces make sense. And so that kind of evolved into this notion of a decisioning supply chain. What decisions are critical for us to be competitive, to create competitive advantage? And let's work backwards to understand what heuristics have to be applied, what data feeds those heuristics, what sources create that data. In the case of, and I know you said that, well, everyone has a strategy to turn PDFs into data. Well, sort of. I mean, I think that's still evolving, any kind of unstructured into structured. But it turns out that's a really, really important part. What is the raw form of this data that we get? And it's not just PDFs. I mean, now it's images and videos and satellite imagery, and all that is unstructured and feeds this supply chain.
Just because we've got time, tell me what happens. So you take this PDF. What journey does it go through in an Indico data-driven world where this raw data ends up as something which is a decision or a potential decision that sits in front of the underwriters? Just give us a quick.
Yeah, and then using my working backwards metaphor, first is what is the data that is going to make your differentiate your business? Is going to accelerate time to quote or whatever it is you're trying to achieve? And that then tells you, well, I have this schema that I have to map to Guidewire or to my Workbench, et cetera. So now I'm working backwards, right? Okay, so that's my schema. So where do I find that data, given that this Tower of Babel metaphor, the people who supply me with this data, brokers and customers, are going to give it to me however they have it, right? That's sort of the Tower of Babel problem. It might be PDFs, it might be Excel, it could be, could be in the body of an email. So, all right, now how do I train the machine to be able to interpret and understand that and normalize that? How do I validate that data with third-party data sources? Simple things like addresses and people's names, and Gary mentioned social security numbers. The less you can sort of infect your data stores with bad data, you're really helping yourself over the long run. So it's extraction, it's validation, it's normalization, and now with Gen AI, things like summarization, you're talking about interpretive type things you want to do to it. So now summarize it for me as well.
Have you got real life examples? Something that's in production that that brings that to life?
Yeah, for sure. I think where Gen AI has sort of accelerated our business is yesterday you had to really think about how you're going to create quality training data. And that usually meant labeling and things like that. Maybe you offshored it, maybe you did it in-house, maybe you used a tool like ours where you didn't need a lot of training data, but you needed some. Now you can use Gen AI to label your data to in turn create models that are more explainable, more cost-effective, discriminative type models. So customers of ours are doing that today. And now into summarization, the question is, what are you trying to summarize? And we're back to the future a little bit. I've been in enterprise search for 30 years, and we always talked about precision and recall. Well, those concepts apply directly to summarization now. What is a good summary? What do you need to be included? How do you know it didn't leave anything out? How do you know it didn't introduce something that isn't there, some kind of hallucination? So that's the sort of next wave, is thinking about how to build summaries that are explainable, scalable, safe, secure.
Is this ready for prime time? I say that in the context of an industry where apparently we're still not quite ready to ingest emails. I mean, we have a huge range of complexity. What do you say to people who say, yeah, but that's all very well, that lies off in the future, one day we'll get around to that?
Well, I mean, I think what's exciting is if you think about, I think of Gen AI really as a new programming language. That's in its essence really what it is. So let's use that analogy here for a second. Prior to Gen AI, there were about 25 million software programmers in the world. We woke up a year later after Gen AI, and there were 100 times more people who could program software, if you think of Gen AI as a programming language. Well, that's really exciting. However, if you're a big enterprise, and now virtually every one of your employees is a software programmer, how are you going to govern that? Who can write the prompts? Who can validate these prompts? What models, what versions of what models were used at what time against those prompts to generate that decision? This becomes a very complex matrix in terms of understanding how durable and reliable those decisions are and being able to work backwards and make them completely traceable, explainable to regulators, to customers. You're talking about risks that expose these companies to hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars potentially.
Brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Tom, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.